Hi, I'm Feroz Khan, and welcome to Drag and Drop Low Code Unplugged, the podcast where we explore the game changing impact of low code in software development. Join me in insightful conversations with IT leaders and passionate low code enthusiasts who are at the forefront of this digital evolution. Together, we'll explore how early adoption of low code is giving businesses a competitive edge on a global scale. We'll discuss its impact on software development, dissect its role in transforming businesses, and uncover the ways in which it's reshaping career trajectories. So whether you're a seasoned IT professional or a curious enthusiast, be sure to tune in as we share success stories and unravel the mysteries of low code. Subscribe now and stay tuned for a front row seat to the revolution that's shaping the future of technology. So let's go. Hi Carl, how are you?
Hey, Feroz, doing great. Great to be here.
Yeah, thank you for agreeing to be a guest on the podcast. It's a pleasure to have you.
Yeah, that's awesome. Is it okay still to say like fan of the pod? In which case,
Yeah,
like
of
fan of the pod, great
course.
to be on it.
Of
And
course.
I've watched all these videos with eye track backgrounds, and then it's a
Yeah.
little bit surreal to be like, oh yeah, I'm on the other side of the camera
Yeah, you
now.
made it. Yeah, you made it. No, I really appreciate it. It's really good to have you on. I know
Sure.
we've been talking for a while, so we've finally made it here.
Yep.
It's a pleasure to have you. We'll obviously get stuck into things in a minute, but it'd be good to kind of start off with a bit of an introduction to yourself, who you are, where you're from.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I think the hopefully the takeaway from the introduction is that, at least in my experience professionally, like it's very much not a straight line. So I started off as a bioengineer in undergraduate. I was really interested in doing research and scientific research, being on the forefront of what I thought was going to be scientific development and ended up combining that with another degree in entomology. And so I was looking at insect systems and I was looking at inspiration from insect systems and trying to apply it to engineering systems.
Wow.
And I got to work on some cool projects, but I found that I absolutely hated lab work. And so, like in a room, no windows, long hours, like,
Yeah,
smelling chemicals just was
yeah.
not my jam. And some of that really came to light when after undergraduate I kind of did I got like I supported myself both by me and this guy from business school did a startup company that was on doing biodegradable plastics and agricultural
Wow.
applications for pest management. And but that as a startup I made like zero money, so I needed
Yeah.
like to feed myself still, and I was doing
Yeah, of
some
course.
research at the university to kind of supplement that. And as you might expect, someone without a PhD finding a scientific or founding a scientific based company is like a horrible idea. So we
Yeah.
failed miserably and crashed and burned.
Yeah.
I would not have invested in us, so I don't blame investors for not doing it. And kind of had to like, that wrapped up. Wasn't sure where I was going to go. Didn't feel particularly great about myself, having kind of like tanked that business and looking around, I was like, all right, well, let's go back to kind of graduate school,
Mm.
as I think, a lot of folks want to do. And this was 2008, so right before the financial crisis. But at that point in time, like it wasn't clear is like this going to be a good time or a bad
Yeah.
time to go back to school. And I
Yeah.
know that similarly, like we've gone through multiple ways of kind of like market fluctuations, and a lot of folks are trying to figure out like, is there a good time for kind of study or to kind of bolster your career? And took on a lot of student debt as going to I did a JD MBA for graduate school, and that worked out for me kind of ultimately. But like it was a product of like at that point in time, I had feel like I was honing in on like the things that I like to do. I was interested in running businesses, advising businesses, and taking some of my scientific background, but focusing much more on the business kind of strategy side of it. And so ultimately, I was lucky enough that even though the cost of graduate school was intense, like I felt like I had kind of a path forward out of that to kind of
Yeah.
to do some work. So I ended up practicing as an attorney for a number of years, and then wasn't really into kind of practice, but the goal of that, like from the get-go, was not to practice long term, but was to get into actually business strategy and like legal services,
Hmm.
which knowledge management is kind of like the role that a lot of like folks end up in. If you're practicing, you want to get more onto kind of like the tech kind of strategy side of it. And then so I transitioned in a knowledge management role, and then kind of was lucky enough to join that team really at a formative stage on the CAM team's journey at Morgan Lewis when it was just a few of us at that point in time. And now
Yeah.
we've got a department, lots and lots of people, lots of specialization, but really kind of got lucky of joining that team at the right point where I got to like kind of take the career and kind of mold it in the direction that I wanted. And ultimately that led to an opportunity that really, I think one of my colleagues deserves a lot of credit, Josh Rosenzweig, for kind of identifying, as well as kind of our chief, Colleen Nihill, but saw an opportunity with our business where we could help our attorneys stand out in the crowd a little bit by offering uh, co-creation solutions with clients. So key client, key partner, what makes that partner really unique or different from another like, law firm, expensive, New
Hmm.
York, all credentialed, like what is really going to be the difference between those two services? That's where we kind of step in and we say, look, we're going to identify this problem that you, the client, have, and we're going to listen to you. We're going to care about your business, and we're going to build something together that's going to be great. And the clients love it because everyone likes to make stuff. They
Yeah.
like when their service providers are listening to their business and listening to their problems. And then it's fun for us to make stuff on the other side. And then that partner has something that is unique, that's differentiated, that they can go to the market with and say, we've got something that's special. Like, you want to work with Feroz because Kyle helped me kind of build this thing, but like
Yeah.
no one else, like, that
Mm.
guy over there, he doesn't have that. So this is
Yeah.
why you kind of
Yeah.
want to work with me. And that has been this model that we've kind of replicated, that we started off using low code for that fairly early on in the process because we were
Mm.
starting from scratch. Like, I didn't
Yeah.
have a technical background, at least not in the software development space.
Yeah.
So we needed to leverage lots of resources and scale relatively quickly from a position of being pretty ignorant about a lot of those things. So relying upon experts in multiple different domains to
Yeah.
kind of help us out. And we also were kind of fresh to the software development world. So we felt like culturally, I think that there's a little bit of like a rebellious nature in low
Yeah.
code. It's like you don't
Yeah.
have to do it this way forever.
Yeah.
And that aligned with us culturally as well of we want to take that good that has been historically good, but we also don't want to assume that everything needs to be the way it has always been,
Mm.
that there are some
Mm.
opportunities for change and doing things differently. And so, that has led to mistakes that we've made for sure. You learn from those mistakes, but
Mm.
it's also been kind of fun to challenge some of those long-standing assumptions and, put our own kind of spin on it a little bit.
Yeah. Wow, that's amazing. And obviously that's what I was going to ask, for someone who didn't have kind of a software development background and kind of starting that process, was that challenging for you? That process of kind of, now having to understand, software development lifecycle and everything like that. How was that kind of, you're used to something you've been doing for a long time. Obviously, you've now got this solution that you want to roll out. So
Yeah.
you want to roll something out, but you have to now learn another skill set as well. So how was that for you?
Oh, it was like absolutely terrifying. So like, but luckily, I didn't realize at the time, but I was developing like all these calluses through, starting off in engineering, those are typically not really touchy-feely kind of backgrounds. And so they throw you into that kind of work and you got to like sink or swim. And then I pivoted to law school and business school. And I remember like my very first like law school written exam. And I'm not sure if it's similar from a UK education kind of standpoint, but in the States, like you effectively go through an entire semester and then you have one written exam at the end of it. And that's like 100% of
Wow.
your grade most of the time for
Wow.
each one of those
Okay.
classes.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh man, I'm so smart. I'm an engineer. Like all these guys got philosophy
Yeah.
majors.
Yeah.
Like they don't know what the heck they're talking about. It's all touchy stuff. And so I went and I wrote the exam like I would like an engineering proof. It was like, this is the fact, this is the answer, done. And it's like, two paragraphs.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
the professor came back and was like you failed. Like you clearly don't understand like this process. Like it's not about like solving for like X as quickly as possible. Like we want you to look at all sides and explore the alternatives and develop the argument, the counter argument, and it's all about like the discussion and analysis. So I went through, it's like it was like failure. Like from my standpoint, like there was a
Yeah.
lot of like jumping into domains, being humbled by the
Mm.
skills and expertise that are required in that kind of space.
Yeah.
And so likewise for software development, I think, at that point I'd learned to approach it kind of with a lot of humility, like rely
Yeah.
on friends and experts,
Yeah.
to kind of a certain degree and develop that. So, we knew what we knew, which
Yeah.
was the pain points in the practice. Like we
Yeah.
knew, we listened to the clients, we listened to our attorneys, having practiced law, like I
Yeah.
had a little bit of insight there. So that's a great place to start with, is if you've got a clear view of the problem you need to solve
Yeah.
with, it's great. Classic
Yeah.
kind of think design methodology approach to it is double diamond. You start with your problem statement, don't jump to conclusions,
Yeah.
work through your problem statement and get that nailed down. Then you work through your kind of your solution analysis.
Yeah.
And so for us, we had a really, really good foundation to start with. Of we knew what the problems were. We didn't quite know how we were going to get there, but we knew that there was an opportunity and something to solve. And so then it became a question of, all right, now what do we do from this point? Do we hire developers? Do we go pro code? Do we do
Yeah.
low code? Do we insource that work? Do we outsource that work? Like all those kind of things were on the table.
Mm.
And we ultimately decided on like some of the value of low code services in particular, like, we're an OutSystems shop
Yeah.
is, but, Mendex also, I think, offers, equivalent services. Is they pull together kind of packages that you can develop around development pipelines, security kind of compliance checks and services, development partner networks, both that you can contract with or you can hire kind of full
Mm.
time. So we started talking with those folks, and we were looking at like incrementally. We don't have to ramp up and have like 5 dev teams from the
Yeah.
get
Yeah.
go, right?
Yeah.
Like start small. Like what does a single project deployment kind of look like? And can we partner with a development partner that will spin up a team for us on a 3-month engagement?
Yeah.
We have a sense of what the time looks like. We have a sense of what the cost looks like, and we can actually have like a production deployment with a relatively constrained cost and a relatively like defined cost. And like if that turns out to be not the kind of thing, that's okay. Like I think the
Yeah.
business is ultimately willing to kind of like invest on venture opportunities, provided that there is a defined scope of investment. Like I think the challenges we run into, or that I've observed from a business advocacy perspective, is when you've got a project that like has no end date and has like a question mark of how much is it going to
Yeah.
cost. Like it's really hard to sign off on like, I don't know, like maybe a
Yeah.
million, maybe like 2
Yeah.
million, like how
Yeah.
much is it going to cost? Like that's much
Yeah.
harder than we think this is going to work. We know it's going to cost 100K. We know it's going to be 5 or 6 months in development. And we have a reasonably high certainty that if this doesn't grow beyond a certain point, we're still going to get X amount of value out of this. Like this
Yeah.
partner has said yes, this client has said yes, and those are much, much easier things for us to get approval for. And then this is like, I think the difference between entrepreneurship and
Yeah.
entrepreneurship is
Yeah.
that we're both working on the delivery as well as the internal approval process. So we've become good at both those things, is
Mm.
both securing kind of funding for the resources we want to develop. And then some like low code has really helped us with that because it helps us compartmentalize costs and make the ask really definable, as well as the actual doing the work itself, which is likewise something that we've also been able to kind of like lever up and take steps where we're at the bottom of this. It's like we need lots of help from lots and lots of different places. And then as we develop our own organic kind of like understanding of it, then we can start to combine and insource a little bit more of the work. So, it was definitely kind of intimidating to start with.
Mm.
But if you're curious and you're interested about it, it's like dig in. It's like there's a lot of
Yeah.
stuff on Stack Overflow, even though like ChatGPT is pretty much tanked their business, but
Yeah.
you can go on
Yeah.
OutSystems boards. There's a ton on YouTube. There's lots of different ways to kind of like bolster, I think, your knowledge, even from a non-technical background, if you're willing to
Mm.
kind of dig into it a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. And you mentioned obviously, that a few, that obviously there's a few low code platforms out there. Can you kind of talk me through why you made the decision to go without systems compared to kind of any of the other ones?
Yeah, absolutely. So granted, I think like I think Josh and Colleen, I think were two of my colleagues, deserve a lot of the credit for this. But my kind of understanding on is that we were looking at the kind of the brand space, like so to speak, and
Mm,
it was OutSystems and Mendex were like the
mm,
two most recognizable, most had the
yeah.
most established kind of brands, and to a certain extent the functionality wasn't hugely differentiated at that time. So granted, like, we've been working with, low code for a number of years now. So it's definitely
Mm,
evolved and changed. And I think
yes. Yeah.
there's a lot different now than it was when we kind of started. But when we were kind of looking at it, we were novices. We didn't necessarily see something that was tremendously different from a what can you produce with both these things.
Yeah.
But it looked like, from our perspective, where we're a global law firm, but a substantial amount of kind of like our work is in the US, and in particular, like, we're kind of like coastal, or our main kind of like
Mm,
hubs. And our perspective was that I think the brands that we were kind of observing from OutSystems had a little bit more of a polish around the pitch, and it gave us the
sure.
sense that this was going to be a long-term partnership in a way that kind of like, gave us a lot of confidence. And we're starting off here, but if this goes well, this is not like a one-off kind of thing. And
Yeah.
so, the relationship that we developed with OutSystems was, we felt that it had a really strong indicators of a good long-term partnership for us. And so it's a little bit difficult if you're listening to this and you're like, well, okay, what does that mean for me? I would say
Yeah.
that, like, understand what your key, indicators are going to be of good and bad relationships from a partnership perspective.
Mm,
And it can be some soft, like it doesn't have to be kind of purely technical, but we felt that there was a little bit stronger partnership alignment there, or there was indicia there that suggested that there was a higher probability of partnership success. And
sure.
that was a little bit where it went. But you kind of, you open one door and you can develop on both those
Yeah.
platforms. Although, like, I haven't met a ton of people that do that. Although it's not outside the realm of possibility.
Mm,
So that could be different from different organizations. But from our perspective, it's been good, and OutSystems has been a big help for us.
yeah. And yourself personally, when you guys decided to go down the OutSystems direction, and obviously, you downloaded, you got the platform, and you're using it yourself. How was your, obviously someone that is not traditional development background, because they do say, obviously, people who have a traditional background in development can be an expert really quick with the platform, can't really understand it well. So someone who didn't have that background, how was your experience kind of with using the platform?
Yeah, I think it was, my first experience using the platform was through Lifetime. So, for
Yeah.
folks that may not be familiar with OutSystems, that's essentially like the management, like, portal element
Yep.
of that application. And, so I, and to this date, really don't spend much time actually developing. Like, we have
Mm.
developers that do
Yeah.
that, and I have to rely upon their expertise for it. But, my view of OutSystems was through Lifetime. And it was, I think it's accessible in some regards, but like you can also dive really deep on it. And so this is
Mm.
where you do need, like, there's value in having a full code kind of background for,
Yeah.
working in these systems, is because, like, there are levels of abstraction. And
Mm.
so for someone that isn't able to dive deeper and deeper past those levels of abstraction, like, you're not going to be getting like the full transparency. You're relying
Yeah.
upon that abstraction to help you kind of understand it. So you see like a GUI icon, and it's like, it says dev, and then you see test and prod, and like,
Yeah.
okay, what happens if you click on those things? Well, then you get like, more and more kind of like technical as you get into them.
Yeah,
So,
sure.
it was, for me, it was a process of, I think, just starting off at the surface level. And
Yeah.
then, like, as I had, demands on me from the business of, like, this has to be, what's the uptime on this application? Like, what does the technical debt like measurement look
Yeah.
like? What is even technical debt, and why do we
Mm.
care about it? And and so those kinds of things were, it was, I think, ultimately, like, yeah, there is a little bit of a learning curve there, but it wasn't so much that I was like, look, I can't get it. Like, I think that the process and The community boards and the resources there are pretty substantial. And so, I would come up with something I didn't understand, and then I would just like, I'd look and search for it. And it's like, okay, now you start
Yeah.
to kind of like, you get a little bit more background on it. But my particular focus was definitely from like the management side of it.
Yeah.
And Lifetime was helpful for that. Granted, from I think a software development complexity perspective, like, this is a lot different from taking your global like petrochemical business and then like completely converting all of your back end like software systems to, I think loosely coupled like low code, like, analogs or, refactored kind of code there. Like we're looking at much more simplistic, isolated, like, building an application that has 100 or so users for it is a lot different from completely overhauling like, your customer portal for a
Mm.
global financial business. And so in those cases, I think like, that experience might be a little bit different managing that complexity. But for us, like some of the company's journey in increasing sophistication was also mine. So we started off very, very small,
Yeah.
not a lot of application objects, not a lot of sophisticated, software kind of complexity. Like the automation itself wasn't
Yeah.
very big. We were still able to add value, but then like we've kind of built as the team and demands have grown, so too have mine. So it's been a little bit of an organic growth, but from what it's worth, like, you can start from scratch. And if you are in a person like me where you've got some kind of like business capacity and you
Mm.
rely on others, like you can start off day one and you can work with your OutSystems CSM or TSM, and
Yeah.
they'll show you how to use Lifetime, and they'll show you like what the graphs kind of mean and what are the
Mm.
things to kind of pay attention to. And, so, it's hard to kind of run it back and like, what would another scenario kind of look like
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
another
Sure.
parallel universe? But for us,
Yeah.
like, we've been, lucky kind of like, I mean, we've been really happy, knock on wood, where our applications have been very stable. We've
Yeah.
had, successful kind of deployments, and, we've had success with our customers where we get to continue to build cool stuff.
Yeah. That's amazing. And yeah, could you kind of talk about what you've managed to build in OutSystems, and also obviously, like you said, you've had some successes, but also some challenges you may have come across that that have caused frustrations for the business that you'd hope to kind of have made easier in the future.
Yeah. My, I like, if anyone has to listen to my spiel again, I apologize for that. But for the folks that are new listening to this, like, welcome. I think that like in our business processes that we observe, like Microsoft Office solves 95% of the stuff you need to do in a business, like
Mhm.
writing documents, sending emails, doing spreadsheets. It like they've been developing for a while. The
Yeah,
Office suite's pretty good. It
yeah,
can handle a lot of that stuff. The parts where we routinely, or the patterns that I routinely observe, are where people in businesses are overextending like Microsoft applications for uses and user flows that it's not really well suited for. So I think a classic example of this is like, everyone, unfortunately, or a lot of people have had the experience of people putting in blocks of text into an Excel file. And it's like, it's not fun to read, pages
yeah,
of text when it's like crammed into like, A1 and A2
yeah.
inch
Little
fonts.
box.
Like
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
it's
Of
not
course.
great. Unfortunately, it happens a lot in business. And so, that's a really classic, easy kind of pain point to identify of like, all right, well, a table format is really not well suited for long blocks of text. You want to have like a card, design kind of, a card-based design UI or something to that effect. So, the things that we've developed have been targeting these kind of problems that you see in business. Like you've got a shared document that people, instead of putting it in the cloud and code editing it, are sending back and forth an email attachment. So like that's a mess. Tons of emails. You lose
Mm.
track of who says what. It's a waste of time. It's a waste of resources. Put that in the cloud. Have a co-collaboration space. Boom, done. That's so that's something that we've worked on. One of the challenges I mentioned with Excel files is, one, they're not super well suited for text, text data, especially long form text data. And two, like almost by their nature, they're read write. So there's really not like, I mean, maybe I'm not an Excel guru, but you can configure this. But typically there's just one version of permissions. Like you send someone an Excel file and they read it and they can write it. That's
Yeah.
also not a great user experience in some circumstances where actually what you want to do is you want to be able to control the data on your end and you want to be able to display it or have the user navigate it, but you don't want to have any writing capabilities on there. So again, another great opportunity for low code or working with OutSystems or something of like take that table, put it on the web, allow your clients a portal to access it. They can have better navigation capabilities. They don't have to worry about screwing up the data. We control the data on the back end, and that's something that we've developed with OutSystems. A little kind of like tweak on that is we're recently we've gone live with one client. We're just about ready to onboard a number of other different clients for our trademarks practice. So we manage or we provide trademark services for a lot of these like big multinational companies that have trademarks in all the jurisdictions around the world. And if you are a client of a typical kind of like law firm, and even this was us not too long ago, if you want to have a question about like, okay, like what do my marks look like across Europe? Like you're going to get probably an export of that in a CSV file in an email attachment. It's not super good experience.
Mhm.
Like it's not great for the attorneys. It's not great for the in-house kind of business partners. And instead, so like, what we've done is we've worked to visualize some of that trademark data and developed in OutSystems. And so we've got some global kind of Google Maps-esque kind of like global navigation piece of it combined with some nice table design so that you can both, table design, I think, is really characterized by like, good data density. You want to be able to get a lot of data in a really kind of efficient kind of condensed space. So you have that kind of on one part of the screen. You have the
Mhm.
globe that's intuitive and navigable and has kind of space associated with it. And then there's a number of other kind of like small business process, automated text extraction, some machine learning stuff, and of course like we've been working a little bit with Gen AI, which I'm sure like just
Mhm.
about everyone else has as well. But there's still a tremendous amount of value and opportunity that we've had just to I think take that 5% of the business practices that like Microsoft is not super well suited for, but
Mhm.
nonetheless people are trying to like bend and cram it into that space. And they're like, look, there's a better way of doing this. It'll help you stand out in your clients. It'll give your clients better experience. And so if you're kind of looking at pattern, even from your day-to-day life, whoever's kind of listening or, Feroz yourself, it's like,
Mhm.
what's that one part of Microsoft Office that like just drives you crazy? Like that's
Yeah.
probably a use case that we're working with and trying to improve upon.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. And what's the kind of, customer experience feedback you get from, now that you've offered these solutions, obviously you look for feedback from customers. What's kind of, since you've rolled it out, what's some feedback you get?
Yeah, so there's this is going to be like legal services specific, and I want to be careful
Okay.
not to kind of like overextend it to like other industries that like,
Yeah.
maybe more geared towards like, independent kind of software, vendor or
Mm.
ISV type,
Yeah.
it could be a very different kind of experience. So, for us, it's I don't think it's too kind of critical of legal services that it's like that the customer experience with legal by and large is not like super great. I think that everyone understands that the attorneys are really talented and by and large they care about their clients and they care a lot about customer services. But there is a tremendous amount of opportunity to, I think, step back from it and look for opportunities to really meet the clients where they're at from a business process or business requirement perspective. And some of it is too, is it's like people are busy. It's like work. It's not like, I'm serving you like a pint of beer, like this is the best kind of beer I've ever
Yeah.
tasted. Like
Yeah.
that's a
Yeah.
fun experience. But like,
Yeah.
a lot of time business processes, like you're not optimizing for like max amount of time with like eyeballs on a screen. Like you want that person to go through that process as quickly as possible. And so you get kind of like a, hey, thanks. That's great.
Yeah.
This took me an hour before. It only takes me 5 minutes now. We really appreciate it, but like, enough, let's move on and kind of get to more
Yeah. Yeah.
business. Like by and large, I
Yeah.
think that the feedback has been pretty positive. Like our partners really like it because,
That's good.
they care about one thing, which is making their kind of clients happy. And if we can help to them for deliver something that is kind of delightful for their customers, they really like it. But also like at the end of the day too, it's like I was saying is, a job well done is like cool, tip of the hat on to the next thing. And you don't
Yeah,
get like
yeah,
a
of
ton of
course. Yeah,
kudos for it. Like
yeah,
actually,
yeah,
I think the strongest indicator of positive customer experience is something equivalent to like a net promoter score, or you get more work. So like our
yeah, of
business is
course.
really built upon we start our relationship with our client from one area of practice. Like we essentially, every aspect of legal services you can imagine, like Morgan Lewis provides in some case. And so then we start in a trademark, then we start doing a little bit of patent work, then we do a little bit of labor and employment work. And so if you see that pattern of expansion within a client relationship, they don't need to tell you you're doing a good job.
You know
Like
you've done a
they're
good
kind
job.
of
Yeah,
like
yeah,
their money and their, their fees are that kind of
yeah,
indicator for you. And I get that you have to be careful about that because then if your budget kind of like then starts to degrade or to
mm,
decrease, you need to like understand why that's kind of happening. And that
yeah,
needs to be a conversation. But so far where we have implemented our software kind of solutions in support of the legal services, we've seen that being an indicator of strengthening relationships with those clients and more work
yeah,
from them.
yeah. That's great. And it's something that it's kind of the main kind of tag for low code is obviously speed, right? Everyone
Yeah,
talks about speed. You can develop faster. You're obviously not using your own dev team. You've leveraged partners, OutSystems partners, and like you
yep,
said, you started off with kind of some small things. 3 months, 6 months. We'll start with this and see how we go.
yeah.
As a customer kind of using it, obviously all the platforms will say we're faster than traditional.
Mm-hmm.
Could you, would you be able to confirm that that is the case, that, certain timelines for you that you expected for things to be built was built at that speed?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think like if if you want to like not like I think take a step back and I think agree to like a level of kind of like I think a base kind of place to start from, and that's like business, no matter what kind of business you're doing, is you've got a limited amount of resources, and then your question is how do you deploy those resources to get the most return on your investment? And so that could be like I think that then will be manifested in build versus buy decisions. Where do you outsource? Where do you insource? But like ultimately, as a business owner, as a business manager, somewhere, somehow you're making these decisions of like fixed resources. Where do I deploy that to the maximum kind of effect? And so for us, like, low code is not the be all end all. It's like it's part of a portfolio of development resources that you want to be really careful and thoughtful about using. There's going to be some places for pro code, and that's where
Yep.
we've experienced. We can get into that like a little bit
Yeah.
later, if helpful. But like, and there's some places for straight up no code too. Like, there's a spectrum of opportunities that are available there, and you have to, I think, ask yourself if I'm going to invest this for my team or for my business, like where am I going to be moving the needle with those stakeholders? Those could be
Mm.
internal clients, those could be external clients, but like you're going to get credit for certain things and you're going to get more credit for certain things, you're going to get less credit for certain things. So like in our cases, like we've got really, really stringent cybersecurity kind of like
Yeah.
requirements. Um, but cybersecurity is really tricky, right? Because it's like really no one pats you on the back for having like killer, like,
Yeah.
information security protocols. It's like,
Yeah.
it's only when it breaks that it ever gets kind of
Yeah.
noticed. And so, that's one of those things where you have to think about like, all right, where do you rely upon like an industry expert to help you maintain those technical cybersecurity or information security kind of requirements, knowing that like I may want to personally, I need to focus on like moving the needle from a UI or a customer experience standpoint. And I need the cybersecurity to just work, but work really reliably. And in those cases, like I think that's where OutSystems and where low code is an interesting tool to be able to use because they bundle together a bunch of those parts of software
Yeah.
development for you where you can decide where you really want to focus your time a little bit. And so for us, like, we definitely got to like, I mean, like if you go back and you rerun this kind of scenario of our first engagement with OutSystems and our first engagement with low code, like the time and effort it would have taken for us to like hire, like, build out the development pipeline,
Yeah.
like figure out all those pieces, do the cybersecurity ourselves. Like, I mean, it was just, I have no, we probably wouldn't have never have gotten off the ground. Like,
Yeah.
how would
Yeah.
someone, our team with like limited technical experience do that? Like, it's
Yeah.
going to be really difficult. You and I were
Mm.
talking before we kind of started the
Yes.
podcast, like, how do you hire for technical roles when you need to yourselves develop the technical capabilities to make those
Yeah.
assessments? You have to work with someone like iTrack, or you depend upon experts to help you do that, and you learn a little
Yeah.
bit of yourself. So, it was a lever for us to kind of go from 0 to 1, but certainly from our experience and speed to deployment, like you're going to be giving up some of the granularity of control that you have with full code, that you have with low code.
Mm.
That's just the nature of the beast. It is
Yeah.
a level of abstraction on top of more of a fundamental kind of like coding environment.
Yeah.
But bit as part of that, like that abstraction allows you trade off, I think, granular control for speed to deployment and replicability. And
Yeah.
you know, we're not too proud to kind of say that like a lot of the processes that we arrange, like it's like Microsoft Office, 5% of the
Mm.
stuff it doesn't do. Like, this is not necessarily like cutting edge, never thought of before kind of
Mm.
processes. These are things that need to be improved upon, but they're also problems that have solutions already defined from them to a large degree. Like, you go on Nielsen Norman Group or NNG, when it's like there's tons and tons of resources on how to design a better table experience. You don't need to like create that wheel again. And
Yeah.
OutSystems has a lot of those application objects or those kind of code libraries. Even if you're developing code, you're running full code, like you're
Yeah.
going to be downloading, you're going to be working with a language, you're going to be downloading a library. Like, you're not writing everything from scratch unless
Yeah.
you need to go to a really fundamental kind of layer of the stack. So, for us, like understanding that there are solutions to these problems, and that like it's our insight into how they're assembled and what problems they're going to solve for the business, like that's less of a coding problem and more of
Yeah.
like a business problem. And then you can use something like low code to then very quickly and very stably and reliably get something in production live with your clients, without having to solve all those problems from scratch. Because,
Yeah.
frankly, there's a lot of really good developers out there that are willing to kind of share their lessons learned, and you can take
Yeah.
advantage of that.
Yeah. Leveraging that experience, and that's why, like you said, you guys not being technical, you can leverage the kind of experts that you're partnered with for these situations.
Yeah, or at least you get the process started. You're
Yes.
not going to
Yeah.
go from 0 to expert day one.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
give yourself a path to kind of get into that kind of point. And so that's
Yeah.
has been a little bit for us, is we get a little bit more sophisticated day by day. But the 0 to 1 problem, whether or not you're writing a paper or a book, or you're just writing code and you're getting something out there, I think that's like a legitimate issue for like a lot of businesses, is that they
Yeah.
don't come from places where they've defined software development as part of that business's core competency. So they've done something else. You're making, stacks of paper, you're making widgets or whatever it is. And then it's like, we're all kind of now coming to terms with the modern customer experience and competitive landscape, is like, you have to combine the digital with, I think, the analog or whatever. You may have like a
Mm.
digital business as well, but I think in particular for legacy organizations that have really, really strong brands, but then also are needing to look to the future and think about what does competition kind of look like going forward. It's going to be
Mm.
a combination of leveraging the best digital tools as well
Yeah.
as staying true to some of those origins. And sometimes that might mean like you got to come to terms with, what does it mean to be like the best at X and also to be the best in software development? And that's
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
like a little bit of a scary, prospect. But luckily, like there is things like, the services that you guys provide for us, and as well as
Yeah.
like, low code environments, that there's businesses out there where they're like, we will help you get there.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
You're there to help bridge that gap. And, certainly I think for us is we, did not, Morgan Lewis 150 years ago in Philadelphia was not thinking there was a software development shop. Like, we're
Yeah.
developing software now.
Good though. Yeah, yeah, exactly. That's crazy. And I'm interested to know, obviously you mentioned that you touched on, you've had situations where you've used pro code, you've had situations where you've used no code. I'm interested to know kind of why you had those situations. Was that something that low code didn't offer it, or was this easier to do it? Because even, I've spoken to people from OutSystems and they say we're not going to be suited for everything, and but what we are suited at, we're really good at. So was it kind of a situation where it was something that, you just couldn't do it with low code, or you just felt it was better to do those things in traditional pro code or no code?
Yeah, I think, there are times which, and this is just a little bit of like our personal journey, but I
Mm,
think one of the things that the team did start with was a really strong sense of design as like part of our culture. And so we had, I think some of it was developed and taught, some of it was intuitive, but we had a really strong sense of what the customer experience was going to be like and what we
mm,
wanted that to mean for the user interface and the UX as well. And like I was saying, like one of those trade-offs that you're going to have with low code is like you're not going to be able to like change the bevel on like that button like endlessly. Like there are
yeah,
limitations to how much you can kind of bend and change and customize like those elements of the software you're developing. So for us, we start off with a low fidelity kind of like design, might be in something like Miro or in FigJam. Then we'll go and we'll do more of like the high fidelity design in Figma,
yeah,
oftentimes like developing a clickable prototype in Figma. And from there, like there needs to be a translation process. Like there's not a connection between like a Figma image file and like the code in like OutSystems because they're
yeah,
different mediums, they're different
yeah,
modalities. So, in that translation process, as anyone, who's multilingual, like listening or has multilingual experience can appreciate is like, that translation, like you're never going to have like a perfect fidelity between those things. There's things that are going to be gain or loss between those two languages, and so you need to accept that in some degree. Is like, what does that translation look like from the design file to the software code itself? What language you choose to write is going to give you different, abilities to kind of do that. So,
yeah,
there are certain circumstances in which like we're willing to kind of compromise and say like, okay, look, I know it looks close to, but not exactly like what the Figma file is. Like that's okay, and then that's fine. You get the benefits from low code as part of that. No code is more extreme version of that. Like
yeah,
you really have much, much more limited control over what the software itself is going to, what the architecture of the software itself is going to be. Like it's bigger, like if low code is Legos, then like it's Duplo for like
yeah,
notebooks.
yeah,
They're
okay,
like
yeah,
they're
yeah,
big blocks. And so that can be acceptable, I think, for some processes where you really do want to optimize like speed to deployment, or I think
mm,
something that's really interesting, whether or not it's like Project Morpheus or it's a no code. Like one of the things we
yeah,
evaluated no code for a lot was a lot of, I think, our customer experience, both internal and external, is like we want to deliver as high fidelity and output as we can as early on in the process as we can. So like we don't want you to wait around for God forbid years, but months or even weeks for, to see what we're talking about. Like I think
yeah,
our 5-star experience is like we come to that first engagement and we've already got a mock-up of the application that's running in production and you can go around and play around. It's like, this is, or we give you multiple different options. And this is even
mm,
before we sit down and we talk with you about it. And then like,
yeah,
imagine like your experience on it. It's like, wow, these guys have like already spent 100 hours working on these things and we haven't even
yeah,
engaged them yet. Like, that's an extreme kind of like moonshot example, but like
yeah,
we use some of the animations in Figma to give you like the simulacra of like a software application, even though there's no code running on the background, like, per se. It's just essentially like a fancy kind of PowerPoint that's running.
yeah,
But we thought about like, could you essentially insert no code in between Figma and low code where you could get something that's a low fidelity actual running application within a day or two and get validation from your clients about like, are you on the right track or not? And knowing that you're going to have to refactor that entirely, like, quote unquote,
yeah,
refactor it, but you're going to have to redevelop it in that other environment. But I think we've been really willing to sacrifice the cost of redevelopment for in exchange for the delight of the customers or getting
yeah,
feedback earlier on in the process. If you
yeah,
know where to kind of realign or to align with that client day one or day two versus like month one or month two, like
yeah,
that's a really, really big difference from like a project
yeah,
management perspective. So, but then that was no code, like, on the other side, on like the full code side, we've had, it's been a process of as we develop our own technical skills a little bit, then we
Mm,
become more technically adept at hiring and assessing talent or working with yourself and getting a really
sure.
good front end developer there. And then maybe it's like, okay, cool. Like we need this front end to look exactly as we imagine it, period, no
Yeah,
compromises.
yeah,
So
yeah,
then we're going to split the front end from the back end. We're going to use OutSystems and have those like defined endpoints, but then we're going to run the front end code entirely developed within Next.js or whatever kind of language we
yeah,
want to use. And we own that. So, but you own that. If it doesn't go
yeah,
well and you need to maintain or it's got bugs,
yeah,
it's like OutSystems and all the infrastructure that's there to monitor that isn't going to be in place. Like you need
yeah,
to be able to then own that code entirely. But that's a step. And you can imagine again, like I think I was saying, like for us, like the back end kind of practices, I think are we're looking for solutions that are clever, but they're not like tremendously innovative, like in the sense of what OpenAI is going to be doing with their applications.
mm,
So, OutSystems is really, really robust, especially for backend like our architecture. It's really kind of predictable, stable, and scalable for us. So, like, that would be a scenario where, like I said, if we feel really committed to the front end needs to be exactly as we want it to be, and maybe it's not going to get quite there without systems, so we'll develop the front end ourselves, full code it, and
mm.
then split it and have the API kind of like endpoints between the front and the back ends. That is the back end's being run on OutSystems.
Yeah, yeah, very interesting. And we spoke about it a lot offline, and you touched on it as well. Gen AI is kind of everyone's talking about it, and you mentioned you guys are kind of using it a little bit. How is the business leveraging AI and kind of your plans for the future with with AI?
Very carefully, as you might like imagine. So
Yeah,
the as a legal service provider, client confidentiality is the like cardinal rule. So if you're working with a closed model, like there was this, LinkedIn post maybe a couple months ago, and I forget if it was like Casey Flaherty of Lex Fusion or who kind of posted it, but was essentially saying like, hey, for all you guys that are using Microsoft Azure OpenAI services, you need to read the fine print there because like even if you think it's being like in your Azure environment, like Microsoft still has the right to like audit information that's going like to their OpenAI kind of like run servers for it was like model compliance or something like
mm.
that. And some people said they knew about it, and other folks were like, we got to go back and talk to Microsoft on that because like
Okay.
they didn't quite realize that like if it's not your server, it's not your server, and they can
Yeah.
tell you that like well it's a private server and like but like they hold the keys to those or those service providers by their business, they're in the business of selling proprietary software, so they're going to control that and what are the implications for client confidentiality in that regard. So the confidentiality issues aside, the NLP capabilities that are offered by LLMs for our business are really tremendous. So I think the hype is legit that like we've
Yeah.
got a lot of unstructured data that is on our servers that you want to be able to query and run analysis on and get information from. So traditionally, that's all been around more traditional information retrieval searches, like keyword searches, whatever
Yeah.
you kind of expect to index that data, and then you want to like and search for it. The benefit, of course, of LLMs is that when embed that data and then you create you turn that data into a vector database, you're able to then query like higher level concepts. So you don't have to search for, I don't know, wrongful termination. If that word's wrongful termination previously needed to appear in the keyword search, then you weren't going to get results unless those keywords were there. But if what instead is you can like actually then generate a concept of wrongful termination through that vectorized kind of database, then you can use an LLM to search for the concept of wrongful termination instead of the keyword of wrongful termination. So for someone like a long running law firm, like that's a really really powerful way of interacting with historical data to the
Mm.
benefit of current day kind of practitioners. So like the hype is legit.
Yeah.
That said, though, is this is now part of our learning curve. Is like it's been interesting to I think see like the evolution of like a lot of law firms started on prem, and then the cloud computing revelation kind
Yeah.
of like came about. And in some ways, I think you're starting to see now actually there's value in not going all on prem or all on cloud, but there's certain circumstances where actually like hosting your own model on prem like is going to be a compelling case. But none of these things are going to be the be all end all. So, we're exploring opportunities of what private model kind of running looks like, what leveraging, OpenAI kind of server kind of
Yeah.
looks like, what are the use cases for that, what are the guardrails you need to put around that. But we started from old school kind of like AI of automated text identification extraction. That's like a really classic kind of use case for e-discovery folks. If there's any of
Mhm.
those listening, relativities, the discos is long before LLMs were ever a thing that they were doing really sophisticated NLP kind of at scale. And we've done, some of that kind of on our team, but now we're also exploring what is the jagged edge of kind of LLM capabilities kind of look like for us? What are the things that it's going to be well suited for? What are the things that we still need to do research and we still need to kind of work on? So it'll be a function of like our clients themselves are so diverse. Like there's some that are in the cloud services business where they want us to perhaps use not only their cloud services, but actually the models that they're developing. There are folks that are like, I don't want you anywhere near an LLM whatsoever. So
Yeah,
like
yeah,
we have like a single, monolithic thing of like everyone gets it or no one kind of gets it. Like that's
yeah,
not really going to serve us well to be able to meet our clients where they're at. So I think a lot of the stuff that we're doing is being able to position ourselves to adapt to each one of our clients' needs and to meet our clients where they're at on their AI journey, which feels like, that's a bit of like, a tagline I'm taking away
yeah,
from my chief, Connor Colleen, but
yeah.
we're in the business of customer service and exceptional customer service, and
Mm.
that may include Gen AI, that may not include Gen AI.
Yeah.
But we're certainly excited about some of the functionality that OutSystems is rolling out, whether or not it's agent
Asian builder,
builder
yeah.
or we've told OutSystems that we want to be on the early access program for Morpheus, and we want to be in
Yeah,
there, work
okay.
with them, and give them feedback and
Yeah,
take advantage of ourselves. Because I think, like we were talking about like low code versus no code
yeah,
previously, that one of the use cases for us for Morpheus, and it seems to kind of align, I think, with what some of the OutSystems wants to do as well, is whether or not we can use Morpheus to actually allow our designers to take and develop code from those initial customer interviews, day one interviews, and
yeah,
day two have a function application that may have a bit of spaghetti code in there because the LLM kind of generated it,
yeah,
but you can have a functioning application that looks, I don't know, like oriented on a cardinal direction standpoint. It's pointing north, and the customer's like, "This is amazing! Like, this looks great." And they're like, "Okay, cool. Like, this is all part of our design process, and we're going to go and we're going to, build it out to the fidelity and the specifications that you want. But we can turn around a functional application in a day as opposed to kind of like a week." And that's further accelerating our ability to communicate with the client and communicate value, which, we were talking about before, I think is
mm,
a lot of what we're trying to kind of do. So, but like you can't put the cart before the horse. Like in a
yeah,
lot of cases, I think Gen AI is sometimes a solution looking for a problem. And so
yeah,
like we're not going to roll out like a thing there and just be like, "Hey, look, this is a Gen AI application." And then
yeah,
like, what does it do? I don't know, it makes pictures and stuff. And then,
yeah,
so for us, it's very much going to be still be driven by what's the really definitive problem statement? Does that lead us to a Gen AI functionality? Like, if so, great. We'll go and do
yeah,
that. Starting to kind of play around some there, but still, there's a tremendous amount of work that we're doing, which is just straight up like solving for business processes where Microsoft Office isn't well suited for it.
yeah, yeah. And is there anything in the platform that, obviously you're not doing the development work, but is there anything that the platform doesn't offer that you'd like to see in the future? Because obviously, there's releases every year, right? And you talked about the AI features, Gen AI and everything that's coming. But is there anything that's kind of a thing for you guys that you've requested or spoke to your CSM or TSM about that, it'd be good as feedback of that, it'd be good for the platform to offer you?
Yeah, yeah. So I think our CSM and TSMs know kind of where our pain points are. We've talked with them about it. Some of it is more just philosophical of like, the magical kind of like unicorn solution is, can you get the all the benefits of low code with none of the drawbacks? And like I don't like frankly know if that's the case or not. Like some of the
Yeah.
benefit is that it's like there's pre-built kind of components and there's abstraction there that you benefit from that level of abstraction. But right now we're working in multiple different systems. We're working in Figma, we're working in OutSystems, we're also developing some of like the code kind of ourselves.
Mm.
We're deploying in Azure. I think it's what's interesting is you listen to Paolo, you listen to the team. I know you've had some senior OutSystems
Yeah.
kind of execs like on the podcast, so you've heard from them
Yeah.
themselves. Like they have a vision of OutSystems that is like, I think, moving up and down, like, OutSystems is kind of like right here. They're thinking about like, what does OutSystems look like over here? And what does OutSystems looks like
Yeah.
over here? And I think in some regards, like Figma started there from a design perspective, but now they've got like dev mode in Figma. Like they're also
Mm.
thinking about like, what's Figma look here? What's
Yeah.
Figma look here? So those two things I think are moving towards each other a little bit, but the
Mm.
benefit being that there were these disciplines, product manager, designer, developer, engineer, and they all had their own little spaces, right?
Yeah.
And when they had to step out that space or hand something off, there was inefficiency, there's things that are
Yeah.
lost in translation. And so that's all like stuff that the businesses want to target. And if you're a service provider like OutSystems, one of the benefits you can say like, well, we can solve this problem for you because now both those parties are in a single space, single bill, less miscommunication, what have you. So I think what we would like to see them do is, we've got these multidisciplinary professionals that are not designers or developers. They're designers and developers. So they're
Mm.
developers and designers and business professionals. And so being able to bring in some of the design work like in OutSystems and it's done natively there, whether or not that's through Morpheus. But like right now, what we're struggling with a little bit is like you've got a Figma file and you export that and it needs to be translated into the OutSystems. And so there's a Figma to Next.js kind of like,
Yeah.
connection through Webflow. And we use that like a little bit, but there's not like a Figma to OutSystems or
Mm.
Figma to Webflow to OutSystems. Like, there's kind of gaps there. So
Yeah.
I think, our ideal kind of like, Nirvana state in the future is that like actually there is like a single workplace that these folks all kind of work in. You've got your business, your product managers, you've got your designers, or you've got one person that wears all three of those hats.
Yeah.
And they're able to not only understand what the technical requirements are, but then conceptualize the designs, generate slash write the code, and also then deploy a scalable application from there. So I think like that's something that it's still kind of like TBD a little bit, but they're
Yeah.
definitely like moving in those kind of directions. And you even listen to like I think some of the OutSystems like project timelines, and they're
Yeah.
anticipating like increased efficiency and leverage of their developers. So single professionals being able to do more.
Yeah.
There are limitations to that. I'm not saying that then like the world becomes smaller, but then each
Mm.
professional has these superpowers that are associated with
Yeah.
these applications where you can start from your place of competency, that's development, and then you can acquire some design work and you can acquire some business or some product management work, and the systems are helping to kind of support that a little bit. So I think we're moving in the right direction there, but still one of our pain points is when you need to like go from one place to another, or you need to translate that, that's always inevitably something gets lost in translation.
Yeah. 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 And just to kind of, a final question is, kind of, and obviously every business is different and, traditional is suited to some and low code to others and no
Mhm.
code or whatever. But, what would your advice be to businesses who are considering low code? Because there are, one of the reasons why we started the podcast was one, a lot of developers are skeptic about learning low code, and two, a lot of businesses are skeptic about doing their projects in low code and they think it's for really small time applications. So what would be your kind of, message to those kind of people who are still quite skeptical about low code?
Yeah, I don't know, like be skeptical. You should be as skeptical about legacy processes too. It's like you should be
Yeah,
skeptical about both those things. There's very little that I've observed in my kind of like, limited life where there is a single be all and end all solution for these variety of kind of circumstances that can like, you can encounter. So, I even for full pro developers, like who's going to go out there and say it's like, oh yeah, you want to use COBOL for everything. Maybe back like at some point in time, someone was like, yeah, COBOL is like,
yeah,
but like, it's
yeah,
like you're going to use HTML and CSS for some, parts of the application. You're going to be using, Java and Python for, for other parts. And it's like these are all tools and they're all methodologies that are suited for particular types of end goals that you want. And so for, low code, like it is optimized for some of those kind of those metrics that we're saying, speed of deployment, kind of like bundled services, standardized replicable kind of like deployment processes, and like that should be a tool in your toolkit. And if you've assessed it and you're like, yeah, it's not for me, that's cool, that's fine. Like I think that maybe like you've got a particular practice where it's like you
mm,
just need no code, or all you need is full code. But like certainly I think one of the parts of our team's culture that we've really tried to drive down is don't dismiss an opportunity because it doesn't look like something you've kind of done before, or, if you're going to have skepticism, like go out and test that thing and see for yourself. And the nice thing about low code is that like, the onboarding is pretty quick. Like you can go out there, open up a personal account with, OutSystems, go and play around. And if
yeah,
you're a pro developer, like spin up like a game board app for your kid or something like that, or do like,
yeah,
it's like you can definitely go and play around with it and see the value for yourself. But then that's purely like, is it work for you is going to be a function of what are those metrics that you want to optimize for? Where do you want to, with limited resources, go and spend your time? And we were talking a little bit about. I'm also curious about your kind of thoughts
yeah,
here. Is that like how the talent kind of environment has looked, especially with the rise of LLM generated code, and whether or not there's a perception of like, look, you're either going to write yourself or going to have like an LLM write for you. But at least from our perspective, like LLM generated like spaghetti code is a problem because then you have to
yeah,
go and manage that. And humans and LLMs can both write like crap code. So
yeah,
like, those are both like, challenges, but we need scalability, and we need, high availability. We need lots of uptime. We need monitoring capabilities. We need the cybersecurity, like all those things get bundled as part of like our services right now, or included as part of like our package. And that is value kind of in and of itself, is like, what does it mean to run this application at scale and then
yeah,
run it for the lifetime of its deployment? So making updates, making changes, like all those things. And that's a much different task if you spit out a code using GPT-4. It's like all those questions are like are significant and need to
yeah.
be considered for us. But I'm curious from your perspective what you're observing from the talent perspective of like where people are investing their time in pro code, low code, and whether or not those things have been impacted at all by the rise of co-development kind of partners and LLM assisted code writing.
Yeah, what we're finding is obviously I think pro code is it's just so big that everyone's still kind of on that. Low code's always been something that people have been skeptical about, but we feel the talent is still growing. But what we're
Mhm.
finding is pro code and low code talent, just to make sure they're kind of in line with everything, are starting to get certified in certain AI kind of courses and adding that to their tool belt just in case that, if that is the way forward, they're kind of not left behind. If they kind of, we're finding, like you said, you should try something. And then if obviously, if it's not for you, at least, you've tried it and you've got it in your tool belt. I'm finding definitely a lot more pro code and low code people are going towards the AI direction and trying to do any type of certification they can to mention AI on their resume is
Mhm.
something
Mhm.
we're finding is happening a lot at the moment. Where I think eventually, we feel it's a wave that will eventually level out, and people will realize that all three of them have their place, right? So pro code, low code, and AI. I don't think any's going to take over the other, and I
Hmm.
think talent is basically, usually people follow, whatever a trend is, not just in tech. If there's a trend, people will follow if they think that's the way forward. But definitely I feel AI is, really taking, even businesses, not just talent, businesses and talent itself is all about, okay, everyone's talking about it. How can we leverage it? How can we use it? We need to make sure we're not left behind. Um, but there's definitely from both camps, I think low code and pro code, that they're really looking into AI and making sure if it is the way forward, talent already have that. So when they are applying for these roles,
Hmm.
it's very hard to find, the amount of talent around it that have experience in these skill sets is small, right? So if
Yeah.
they can just show, like, we were talking about, obviously, when it comes to um, you know, law, you assess them on their credentials, right? So
Hmm.
it comes a bit down like that. It's going to be very rare to find people who've done a number of projects in AI. So it comes down
Yeah.
to, okay, how many certifications have you got? What
Yeah.
have you done? So it's
Yeah.
definitely a wave. Don't know how long it's going to go for. But it seems to be a big wave that's definitely got everyone kind of thinking about it.
Yeah. I wonder, like, you think low code is now incorporating LLM generated code
Yes.
functionality into their applications, right? Like
Yeah.
pro code, IDMs like or IDEs like Replit
Yeah.
or Visual, VS Code or whatever, like have AI generated code, but it's writing the code for you.
Yeah.
um, and how much of a meaningful distinction like pro code, low code, no code is going to be going forward, where you've got AI assisted or computer assisted like code
Yeah.
generation deployment, that like it really becomes there's some other differentiator that you need to look to, like where does this at particular service that I'm paying for sit within my ability to go and
Yeah.
push kind of like code out there. Yeah, there's an interesting podcast I was listening to with this guy Dan Chipper, who's the CEO of this publication called Ever, and he interviewed Nick DeBoss, who was the developer for the number one coding GPT on the GPT store called
Wow.
Grimoire. If anyone who's kind of played around with
Nice.
it, and in that case, like he's working and he's using services that will then you generate the code and it'll deploy it kind of for you automatically within a Vercel environment or something like that.
Mm.
And um that starts to look like, oh yeah, there's like shades of no code or low code there,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
where
Yeah.
it's helping you with that kind of digital factory kind of pipeline a little bit. And these environments are becoming, or these services are becoming less like kind of distinct like categories, as opposed to a plethora of kind of options that you, the developer, want to be able to use. And the question becomes, it's like, when do you not do you use it, but when do you use it? And so it's
Yeah.
like, for the
Yeah.
skeptics out there, I'd say like, yeah, this is not a question of if, it's a question of when. And
Yeah.
you need to be thinking about, for what you're responsible for, what are you gonna do to deliver the most value with the most efficiency at the lowest cost? And there's going to be different kind of tools you want to use for each one of those
Mm.
circumstances. But yeah, I mean, like, I think it's really interesting to see that from a talent perspective. And I wonder,
Yeah.
like, you know, some of the things that we kind of hire for is not so much like legacy experience, but speed to knowledge acquisition or knowledge acquisition capabilities. And so, like, I don't know if something becomes like, it's not only a metric of like, I got these certifications, but it took me X amount of time to get these certifications, or you're trying to measure something of like,
Yeah.
I'm able to pick up on these things really rapidly, so that going forward, as the times change, I likewise can kind of like, I'm going to be able to pivot and move whatever direction. We think of
Yeah.
that like as an organizational scale, but it'll be interesting to see if if that's a metric that you track at like a human level. And of course, like, you don't want to have someone that just like reads the clip notes instead of like reads the whole book
Yeah.
necessarily.
Yeah.
But
Of
I don't
course.
know,
Yeah.
maybe sometimes the clip notes would be good enough.
Yeah. 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 Definitely. Definitely. Well, I appreciate you taking the time. It was great to talk to you and hear your insights and your views on, low code AI and where the future might go. I really appreciate you, being a guest and sharing your story as well and your background, which was quite interesting.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I really thank you for having me on. It's been awesome to kind of chat with you and looking forward to catch up with you at some of the low code events kind of going
Definitely,
forward. And thank
definitely.
you for running the podcast. Like I found the conversations to be really interesting and you're providing great service for the community. So keep doing your thing and
Appreciate it.
maybe we'll see you on the other side once Project
Hopefully,
Morpheus
hopefully.
rolls out or
Yeah,
our next
definitely.
big
Yeah,
product
exactly.
release. Be cool.
Amazing. Thanks, Kyle.
Yep, no problem. All right, see ya.
Thanks. Bye. Thank you for listening to today's episode, which is brought to you by iTrack. We are a leading staffing firm that solely specializes in supplying both contract and permanent low-code professionals to organizations globally. Navigating the niche landscape of the low-code market requires the best talent, and we recognize its critical importance for our clients. Whether you're a company looking to strengthen your team, an individual seeking the next career move, or someone entirely new to the world of low-code, we're here for you. Our extensive experience and in-depth market knowledge enables us to quickly pinpoint the ideal candidates while offering expert advice and support at every stage of your low-code journey. Reach out to us through our website or connect with me directly on LinkedIn. I'd be happy to assist you. Thank you once again for joining us today. We'll be back next week with another insightful episode. Until then, take care.